Hi there, welcome to What Answer 16 and number 6. And today we're going to be talking about how Joseph's brothers' sin and lie actually confirmed Joseph's fate. It says this in verse 29. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. He tore his clothes and he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colours, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether or not it is your son's tunic?" Yeah, okay. So Reuben, who tried to help Joseph and tried to do the right thing, he goes back to the pit and he finds that Joseph's not there. It says he tore his clothes, and that's a sort of a thing of distress back in those days. Reuben tore his clothes as an expression of horror and mourning because his weak stand for righteousness didn't actually accomplish anything. Joseph might as well be dead because his father, who loved him, would never see him again. Notice the brothers' lie is a continue of their character. They say, "We found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" Now, they knew that it was Joseph's tunic. They showed the cruelty of their whole concept of what they were doing. And it's not only directed towards Joseph, but also towards their father, because he favoured Joseph. This was both heartless and a shocking way to bring news, but also, of course, an absolutely evil lie. It goes on in verses 33 to 35. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and he mourned for his son many days. And all of his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Yeah. Jacob identifies the tunic. We can only imagine the pain of the father losing his son and losing a son that was so special to him. And the strange pleasure the brothers had in concealing the crime. Joseph's brothers decided to live the rest of their lives with this terrible secret. Modern forensic science, of course, would be able to rectify the situation. But notice it says Jacob tore his clothes. He did that thing. It's an expression of utter horror and mourning because his loved son was gone. His grief was understandable, but his failure to see the truth of eternal life perhaps was something that he needed to develop a little bit more. This is also a powerful illustration of the principle that if we believe something to be so, it may as well be that. Joseph wasn't dead, but Jacob didn't know that. But Jacob believed that he was. And as far as Jacob was concerned, Joseph no longer existed. In the same way, the Christian has in truth been set free from sin. But if Satan can persuade the believer that they are under sin, we can sometimes live as if we don't know the actual truth. Notice too, it says, all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. The sons must have been pretending to comfort. And that's something that we need to take hold of too. They not only lied, but they kept covering it up. They were no help to Jacob. What happens to Joseph? In verse 36, we actually get a little bit of information here. It says, "Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard." Now, Egypt was a really large, thriving kingdom, at least for the 1,000 years before Joseph came. The Egyptians were wealthy and had massive natural resources, probably the biggest nation in the world and the strongest nation in the world. They were educated, and that particular time, they really didn't have much in the way of enemies. When Joseph came to Egypt, some of the pyramids that we know so well when we look at the tourism brochures, they already were old, and the Sphinx itself was already made. Yet, in God's eyes, the most impressive thing about Egypt was that Joseph was there. You see, they stripped his coat, but they hadn't stripped him of his character. And as we go through the rest of the story, we're going to find that this particular character and all of the traits of his character are something that plays out in his life. Bless you.